Hello, everybody. Thank you for all being here today on this Wednesday, middle of the week, depending on where you are, possibly freezing as well. We're so excited to have you here today to talk about how to thrive as a neurodivergent parent. I was so pleasantly surprised when we shared about this webinar, how many people were interested in it and how many people were responding, sharing that this is something that they feel like is really important and they're not seeing enough of. So Alix and I are so excited to be able to talk to you all today. Our focus is really going to be on actionable strategies and tools that you can use in the moment, whether you're a new parent with a baby or you have a toddler, or even if you have an older child. We're going to talk about things that are pretty widely applicable. And like with any parenting or mental health advice, there's never any one size fits all. So if you hear anything that, just to keep an open mind, you might hear things that work for you or things that maybe won't work for you and your family, and that's totally okay too. Just take what's valuable and just leave the rest. So that being said, we'll get right into it. Alix, would you mind moving to the next slide? Thank you. So my name is Emily. I'm a psychologist and a certified perinatal mental health provider. I work with individuals and families that are navigating their entirety of their reproductive journey, from trying to conceive, through pregnancy, through postpartum, and a lot of the complications that can arise during that period of time. I'm also one of the co-founders of Phoenix Health. We're an online mental health practice that specializes in working with perinatal families. I'm also a postpartum depression survivor. I have 2 young daughters and I live in South Carolina. So that's just a little bit about me, and I'll turn it over to Alix so she can share about herself.
Hi, I'm Alix. I'm the founder of Tenderly. I am a doula, I'm an educator, and I am a parent to 3 neurodivergent kids. My path to doulahood was not straightforward. I spent many, many years in global marketing and advertising, and then I just had 3 kids, and they're all neurodivergent, and they're wild and wonderful and very, very wise. And just suddenly everything I knew about communication and support and system, it just got turned completely upside down. And that's when Tenderly was born. So I'm a full spectrum doula, which means I work with families from family planning, pregnancy, fertility, into birth, and then postpartum, and what I call postpartum plus. So when I work with your family, I'm with you way into the parenting journey. And I specialize in supporting neurodivergent families. So that's anybody in the family is neurodivergent, whether that's the person giving birth, their partner, or any other children in the family. And I'm so thrilled to be here because I myself am a neurodivergent parent. And so I relate so much to all of you and your experience. And it is so different parenting as a neurodivergent person. And I'm thrilled that we could be here to support each other. I am Emily freezing because I live in Montreal, Canada, and it has been minus 20 degrees here, and it is snowing like crazy out my window in front of me. But I'd love to know where all of you are from. So if you can go in the chat and just let us know where you're from. It's so nice to see where everyone's joining from. And then let's get started. Okay. Yes, go ahead, Emily.
Sorry, I was just going to jump in and say, and please feel free to jump in with questions or comments as we're discussing. We are going to try to have some Q&A at the end, but we definitely welcome any thoughts, comments, and questions.
Oh, I see Delilah's from Michigan and the schools are closed. Okay, I can't believe it. It's December and schools are already closing. We had one in end of October and the schools closed. So what a wild world. But Zach is in Los Angeles. Lucky you, Zach. All right. Well, our agenda for today, we have a lot to share. So let's get started. The first step is going to be to understand neurodivergence. A lot of new language coming up. And I want to be sure that we're all grounded in the same terms. Then we'll move into executive functioning and managing sensory overload. That's a really big one for us. Co-regulating with your child. And then finally, so important, preventing burnout. But let's start with a stat. Listen, there's not a lot of research out there, and we'll talk about that more, about neurodivergence in general. The conversation is really hot right now, and we're hoping that more research is going to come out. At the moment, the numbers that we have are 15 to 20% of the world's population is neurodivergent. That's 1 in 5. So think about your family. Think about your extended family. Think about your colleagues. Think about your children's teachers, everybody that you interact with. 1 in 5 is neurodivergent. This isn't a niche population, a niche community. This is a massive population, a massive community. And that's why support systems and these types of conversations are so important. Because as a neurodivergent person, you're not doing this alone. There are so many of us out there, and we're all doing it together. And we need to start supporting one another. All right, let's do a little poll. Do you know what the word neurodivergent means? And I always ask this when I start these presentations or webinars, because there are so many different versions of what neurodivergent means, and everybody has a different interpretation. So I love to start with the baseline of like, what do we think it means? And then we move forward into the definitions that we're going to be using for this presentation.
I just launched the poll, and it like 2 people said yes. We got 1 no.
Okay.
A little bit
interesting. And if you want, go into the chat and let us know what you think it means, because I'd love to hear that as well. I'll give you like a minute. So I think that before we start talking about tools and strategies, it's really important to like talk about why neurodivergence shows up so differently across these big seasons of our life, this postpartum period, and then that ongoing work of parenting. Postpartum is often the first time many neurodivergent people realize just how much their sensory needs and executive functioning and nervous system patterns can impact your daily life, right? Because everything becomes louder and closer and more immediate. And your bandwidth is just, it's like pulled in new directions that you've never had to navigate caring for other people in the same way. So that's why both of these seasons are so important. And this is why it comes up so much more. So let's see what it means. There's 2 words that get flip-flopped and like crossed over so often. There's neurodiversity and neurodivergent. So neurodiversity, it means that human brains, they naturally vary, right? So how we process information, our sense of environment, and how we move through the world is part of that diversity, just like every other part of us is diverse. Now, the word neurodivergent, it simply means that your brain works differently from the majority. It's not that it works incorrectly. It's just that the way you're wired and your patterns and your way of showing up is different. And this matters as a parent because your brain may need different routines or pacing or different types of sensory input. And that feels different than, are you ready? What most or typical parenting advice or books assume. And that doesn't mean that you're less capable because you can't do it that way. It just means that the usual strategies, they're just not going to work for your nervous system. So I think it's really important to distinguish between neurodivergent and neurodiversity in the way that we use that language, and especially neurodivergent, because it's really important to understand that neurodivergent is an identity. It's a descriptor. It does not require a diagnosis. So if you are a person and you don't have a diagnosis of any sort or a formal diagnosis, and you feel like your brain is wired differently, and you are neurodivergent, then you are. There's no barriers of entry here. And I think that's really like an important distinction from the way it's being used out there. Okay, this is a really important one. This is executive functioning. So executive functioning is the set of brain skills that helps us to plan, to organize, to shift tasks, to manage our emotions, and really importantly, to follow through. I kind of think about it as our brain's CEO. It's like that part of the brain that is trying to keep everything moving in the right direction. So this is the way that I describe it to everyone. It's think about making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, okay? So if you're a neurotypical person, and a neurotypical person is the way we describe a brain that's not neurodivergent, you might think, I'm going to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Great, I'm just going to make it. And then you go and you make it and you don't think about it again. If you are neurodivergent, chances are executive functioning is something that you're aware of. Or even if your brain isn't necessarily aware of it, your body feels it. So you have to notice you're hungry. Find the bread, peanut butter, jelly, the right knife, the right plate, the ones that you feel work best in this situation. You put everything together in the right order. Then you have to clean that sticky knife before you put it into the other jar. Then you have to take your sandwich, move to the chair that feels the most comfortable, sit down. Oh, wait, I forgot to get something to drink. I know that if I eat the peanut butter and jelly sandwich, I'm going to want a glass of water. So I need to go and get the glass. Wait, it's got to be the right glass. And then I put the water into the glass and then I go back and sit down and chill. This is a long chain of thoughts, decisions, choices. And so executive functioning is the part of your brain that's managing all of these different choices, all of these different actions that need to happen in order to get to the end result. And it can feel super overwhelming because it is a lot. And so this, like as a neurodivergent person, we see a lot of executive dysfunction, which means that that part of your brain gets overwhelmed and overloaded, and making those little choices, making those decisions, and taking those actions becomes harder and harder. I see Denise is saying, no wonder I relate. If you give a mouse a cookie, 100%. If you give a mouse a cookie is such a perfect book for us. What a fantastic book. If you don't have it, please go get it. You are going to feel so validated and so seen. I agree with you. All right, Emily, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Alix. That was a really clear definition. Just kind of re-emphasizing what you said earlier, where your brain isn't wrong, it's just different. It's not abnormal. Neurodivergent brains simply function differently than neurotypical brains. And there's no single definition of even what normal looks like when it comes to how brains work. Just like there are no two fingerprints that are alike, no two brains are going to function in exactly the same way. I kind of like to think of it as being like a Mac in a world that's designed exclusively for PCs. And one of the ways that neurodivergent brains do tend to work differently or function differently is that they do less synaptic pruning. And that involves the cutting away of neuron connections that our brains don't use or need. It's kind of like clearing a path out of the woods. So our brains are constantly creating neuron connections. And then as we're getting older, we're developing, we don't need all of those connections to kind of stick around. So our brains are able to prune them. And we know that folks who are neurodivergent, their brains do less of that. So they tend to remain what they would call hyper-connected. So it's kind of like if you picture a map going from point A to point B, a neurodivergent brain map might look like one with a lot of side roads. And again, this is coming off of what Alix said. This is why traditional parenting advice doesn't always work for neurodivergent folks, because it's not taking into account the different ways that their brains work. And that's really why we're here today, to provide tools that are specifically for you and that work for your brain. And I also just want to highlight some of the strengths that come with being neurodivergent. We know that neurodivergent folks tend to have deeper empathy, that they're incredibly in tune to others, and especially to our children, where you can really feel their feelings and validate them in a really impactful way. Neurodivergent folks also tend to recognize patterns that other people might miss. So you might notice that every time you start getting your child ready for school, they become emotionally dysregulated. And you might notice that pattern before even your partner does. And then, of course, neurodivergent folks are often wildly creative, and they can come up with ideas that no one else can think of. And some of the greatest people of our time and in history have been neurodivergent, including even Albert Einstein.
Absolutely. And I just want to call out one thing. There is a fantastic children's podcast called Brains On, and they have a wonderful episode about ADHD. And the way that they describe a neurotypical brain versus a neurodivergent brain is that a neurotypical brain is like an orchestra, okay, who's playing this beautiful composed music. And then a neurodivergent brain is like jazz. That's just so beautiful as well. And the music is fantastic, but it's just a little bit more outside the box. And I love that. I love the way that that's described. Anyways, if you have children who are neurodivergent as well, I highly suggest that podcast. But now we're going to do a poll. So listen, this is a safe place and you do not have to answer this, but do you identify as neurodivergent? We'd love to know, just because we're doing our own research.
Looks like we have a couple yeses, 4 yeses.
Amazing.
Yep, 5 yeses.
You're also welcome to answer in the chat as well. Okay. Let's keep going. So, before we dive into the tools, we're just going to take a look at how neurodivergence, what we see in postpartum and parenting. And, you know, both of these seasons are full of love and connection, and in addition, can stretch a neurodivergent person's nervous system in ways that really often are not talked about. So I think this section is here just to normalize your experience. I'd love to know when you feel like you relate to something, and also to give language to what's going on internally in your body and to help you understand your brain better versus like trying to work against it. So whether you're in the thick of postpartum or you're parenting older kids or you're somewhere in between that, this whole section is just to help you feel seen and supported. Okay, so postpartum. When we talk about postpartum, we're often talking about the physical recovery and also the baby's needs. But if you're a neurodivergent parent, there's a whole extra layer that's really deserving of attention. And one of the biggest challenges that I see, especially as a doula who works in families' homes postpartum, is sensory overload. I also have seen it with myself in my own perinatal experience. So it's the crying, it's the constant touch, it's the unpredictable sleep, and it's even like little small noises and textures that pile up. So if you think, if you pumped, the noise of the pump or the feeling of the pump pulling on your body, listen, none of this means that you're too sensitive. It just means that your nervous system is doing its best under quite intense conditions. There's also executive functioning strain, and that's starting tasks and switching tasks and remembering what comes next. So if you're feeding or laundry or feeding yourself, even basic self-care, it can just feel like you're climbing a mountain. It feels so much harder in postpartum. And that's not a reflection of your capability. It's just a reflection of how many more demands are hitting your brain at once. Now, emotionally, many parents experience really big highs or periods of numbness or flatness. And those shifts can be misunderstood by all the people around you. Because when we look at media or we look at the way that society talks about the postpartum period, often neurodivergent folks, we don't present or feel postpartum in the way that is talked about. And that can bring a lot of shame. So while other people may look at you and say, oh, they're reading disinterest or not coping, it's really just your brain and your nervous system that's trying to find balance. And it's important to name that neurodivergent parents, especially if you're autistic or ADHD, you have a much, I don't know how to like bold this, underline, bold, much higher risk of perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. So it's not because you're doing anything wrong that your risk is higher, but it's just because your system is already working overtime. And then on top of that, you're adding in the hormonal shifts if you're the birther, even if you're the partner. There's massive, real physical shifts that's going on in your body postpartum. So knowing this can help us catch things early and can help us put, like as a doula, one of my roles is to help you put into place support systems in advance so that you're not ending up in a mental health crisis. If any of this, if you feel like you relate to any of this and you feel comfortable sharing, we'd love to hear about it in the chat for sure. So now we move into like, I call it early parenting. But this applies certainly if you have older children or teenagers. When we move into those beginnings of early parenting and this demand kind of shifts, but it doesn't necessarily get lighter. I often say as my children are getting older, my eldest is 10, like I'm seeing that they need me more. For neurodivergent parents, this stage often brings like a different set of challenges. Many parents will talk about the sensory overload from noise and touch, but not in the same way as like a baby that's always on you, but touch from children, rambunctious children. You know, often we as neurodivergent parents will have neurodivergent children and they're using us to co-regulate. If you don't know what co-regulate means, hold on, we're coming back to it. But they use us to help their bodies and their nervous systems feel safe. There's toys and siblings and whining and yelling that's just playful yelling, and it's not like screaming bloody murder, but it sounds like it to our body. And that just doesn't stop. So even things that are joyful, even our kids laughing and being silly, sometimes, and I feel this, it can feel like your nervous system is on fire. It's just running so hot. There's also a lot of executive function fatigue as your kids get older, because there's their routines, there's your routines, there's school stuff that you have to keep track of and prepare for. There's bedtimes and teachers calling and texting and asking for library books. I have no idea where my kids' library books are, but I keep getting asked for them. And it's not because you're disorganized. It's really important to make that distinction. It's because the volume of these micro tasks in this early parenting is, honestly, it's genuinely enormous. And emotionally, it's just really common to move through all of this. There's big ups and big downs. And then, like, in order to protect yourself, you go into these numb states. Now, the numbness, we'll talk about burnout a little bit later, but the numbness can indicate burnout. It doesn't indicate that you're not interested. It doesn't indicate that you're not engaged. It's your brain's way of protecting itself. It's protecting itself from overwhelm. And we know, again, that there's such a higher risk for anxiety and depression in this parenting season for neurodivergent families. Again, if you're autistic, ADHD, OCD, this season of your life, this season of parenting can be really, really challenging. All right, Emily, off to you.
Next. I feel you about the library books.
Yeah.
Always being asked for them, and I never know where they are.
I'm like, can they just stop taking library books?
Yes.
Please.
Please. So I'm going to jump in here to talk a little bit about that overlap between neurodivergence and mental health. So we know that 20% of new mothers experience a perinatal mental health condition. And a perinatal mental health condition is a mental health condition that develops at some point within the first year of giving birth or during pregnancy. And these can include postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, perinatal OCD, postpartum PTSD, and postpartum psychosis. And I also want to note that it's not just birthing mothers that can experience mental health conditions. Fathers and other non-birthing parents can also experience them. The most recent stat is that about 10% of new fathers actually experience postpartum depression. So what exactly is the overlap between neurodivergence and perinatal mental health, and are neurodivergent parents at greater risk? So like Alix explained, we've all seen anecdotally in our work that there is a higher risk of perinatal mental health conditions if you are neurodivergent. But the research is really lacking. The research on women's health in general, on perinatal mental health, and then you add neurodivergence to that is completely lacking. One review back in 2024, last year, concluded, though, that neurodivergent parents are at elevated risk, but we definitely need more studies in this area. The problem with not having this information is that a lot of people are being treated for perinatal mental health conditions without taking into account how neurodivergence might be impacting their experience. And the more we know about that, then the more, like Alix said, we can be proactive and we can prepare. We can set ourselves up for success, and we can reduce our risk of developing a mental health condition or having a mental health crisis. So I know Alix dove into executive functioning. I'm just going to highlight it really briefly before she jumps in with some actionable tools and strategies that you can use. But like she said, the executive functioning skills are like the CEO of the brain. And neurodivergent brains have different pathways and activity in the parts of the brain that are responsible for these CEO skills. It's specifically in the prefrontal cortex of the brain. So this involves the planning, like Alix said, knowing what steps to take to reach a goal. It's the organization, keeping track of where your things are and information. It's getting started on tasks without procrastinating. It can be really difficult to get started, even if you know that you want to start something. And with ADHD specifically, tasks that don't feel immediately rewarding can be especially difficult to start. And then finally, it's the time management, understanding how much time you have and how to use your time effectively. And it can be really hard to estimate time, especially as a new parent doing this for the first time, going in, maybe not having an understanding of how long certain tasks take or all the different interferences that can come up. Time really gets turned on its head overnight when you become a parent, and it just feels in general like there's a lot less of it to go around. I'll turn it back over to you, Alix, to talk about the tips.
I think it's also important to just flag that executive dysfunction can bring a lot of shame. Mm-hmm. And it's really, it gets classified as being disorganized, or, the shutdown can look or be categorized as laziness. And it's really important for you all as neurodivergent parents to remind yourself that this is your brain on overload, on max, and that there is nothing shameful about that. It's about accommodating the needs of your brain and making sure there's enough space. Some tools that can help with executive dysfunction are here. So instead of expecting yourself to power through, I think it's important to have tools that make the tasks smaller and clearer and easier for your brain to start and complete. So the first category I would say is reducing the starting load. So neurodivergent brains often struggle most with that initiation and that moment of getting from 0 to 1, right? So using 2-minute versions of tasks, or breaking things into tiny starter steps, or even body doubling, which is my favorite thing that I've discovered about myself, but body doubling. So having somebody just present there with you can make it easier to initiate. And often I'll do this even on virtually. So even having someone on FaceTime will make it easier for me to get the laundry done. So body doubling can be really powerful. And if you find another parent that, body doubling works for, it's really great to team up and do it that way. The next I would say is externalizing the steps. So when you stop relying on your memory and start putting things outside of your brain, you're almost taking it away from your brain's load. Things like having whiteboards in specific places in your house, or using, I love Post-it notes. I put Post-it notes everywhere, sticky notes. Visual lists work really, really well for people with ADHD often. Even people, autistic people really love often visual lists. Alarms help. I just want to frame these tools. We talked about neurodiversity and neurodivergent brains, right? Every brain is different. So a visual list is going to work really well for someone often with ADHD. But if you are PDA, a visual list is going to trigger your nervous system. So as Emily said at the beginning, we're giving tools, but make sure only take the things that work for you. Not everything works for everybody. Your brain, if you're externalizing these things, your brain doesn't have to hold all the pieces while also managing your kids, your job, your partner, all of the things that come with parenting. We also like time support. So timers, visual clocks, there's really cool ones on Amazon, or anchoring things into routines instead of at specific times. So like, I know before I go to bed, I'm going to take my pills, and I've organized it, and I've spoken to my doctor that all my pills happen before bed, because I know when I wake up in the morning, it's not anchored to my routine. So I'm going to have a really hard time remembering to take my pills. And also, time blindness is so real. And building in buffer time, having a rule for yourself where you build in 30-minute buffer time around everything, is the truest gift. If we're thinking about the holiday season, this is the truest gift you can give yourself. Because if you're a parent, you know that everything with kids takes longer than expected. So another big one is regulate before doing something. So when your nervous system is super overloaded, executive functioning, it just plummets. And a quick break, a sensory break, a stretch, stepping away even for like 30 seconds can bring your capacity back online enough to move to the next step. So if you have 5 steps, if we're using the peanut butter and jelly example, like I take out the bread, I take out the peanut butter, I take out the jelly, and then I give myself a break for 30 seconds before I start actually building the sandwich together. And then there's some like low demand defaults we can give ourselves. So simple freezer meals that you can just heat up, some predictable routine, or one cleanup zone instead of the whole house. So I'm going to clean the kitchen counter today, but that is the only thing I'm going to do. I am not going to touch anywhere else in the house. And these, they lower the amount of daily load. So you don't burn through all of your energy by 10 a.m. and then your body and your brain are just exhausted. Now, I just want to remind you, these tools, they're not about fixing you. They're not about fixing your brain. They're about giving your brain the kind of support that matches how it actually works. So that way you have more capacity to parent, and you're less under so much constant pressure in that part of your brain.
And I think it's really important to also be mindful of not judging yourself for using tools that might look different than other families or friends that you have. I think we all fall into that trap sometimes when we do things differently too. Why can't I do it like so-and-so? And we're all figuring out different strategies and routines that work for our families. So just be mindful of that self-judgment that might try to creep up in there. Now we're going to talk a little bit about sensory overload. So sensory overload happens when our brains receive more information than they can process at one time. Neurodivergent brains usually process background stimuli with the same amount of intensity as primary information. And this happening tends to max out your mental capacity faster. When our brain's processing limit is reached, the amygdala, which is the part of the brain that manages our emotions, can interpret that overwhelm, that feeling, as danger. And in turn, our sympathetic nervous system takes over. And when our sympathetic nervous system takes over, we end up shifting into survival mode, which is also sometimes called the stress response or fight, flight, freeze, fawn mode. And this is designed really to protect us from what we might call a threat. The survival response is very adaptive, but the problem is that in today's modern world, there are so many potential threats around us that our nervous systems are responding to them literally all day long. So if you think of like thousands and thousands of years ago, our bodies were designed to go into survival mode when we faced a real danger. Like we saw, a lion in front of us. Our survival response would get activated, our heart would start racing, we'd start sweating, and in a matter of a split second, we would decide if we were going to run or we were going to fight off the lion. While many of us are not fighting off lions in our daily lives, we are facing a lot of really stressful things and stimuli, like the sounds of text messages, binging, emails from our boss, the sound of our dog barking, our baby crying, person cutting us off in traffic. Our nervous systems are responding in the same way to these threats as they would to something like a lion. And when this response happens, there are four major responses that we could have: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So fight is when we might get really irritable, we might yell, or we might try to control our environment as a way to cope. Flight is when we try to get away. So we might hide under our blankets, cover our ears, or just try to leave the situation altogether. Freeze is really a shutdown. So we might go nonverbal, we might even disassociate. We also might have trouble making decisions, kind of like numb, catatonic type of feeling. Or fawn, which is and can be an over apologizing, a people pleasing, masking, which is hiding your own distress in an attempt to please others, putting on a smile while you're really suffering. And if you're a woman, not to generalize genders, but often women may be a bit more conditioned to have the fawn response when they face a threat.
100%. And I see all of these in labor and birth, especially Fawn, with my neurodivergent clients. Absolutely. All right, let's talk about some tools to help with this sensory overload and these shutdowns. So, especially for neurodivergent parents, we're talking about a very real nervous system experience, and it's not a flaw or like a lack of patience, although it can feel that way. Your system is just taking in way more information than it can comfortably process. And parenting is literally a constant stream of like noise, touch, movement, demands. And I think historically the narrative was just tough this out. But what our goal is to lower the input and support your regulation. One of the most effective places to start is reducing that sensory load. So using tools like noise canceling headphones while you're cooking, dimming the lights, or choosing like soft fabrics that feel good on your body, and simplifying the areas of your house that feel visually busy. And that visually busy can be, because there's clutter, or it can feel visually busy because there's a lot of, big, interesting art in your room. It doesn't necessarily mean one or the other. It's what it feels like to you. So if you're spending a lot of time in your kitchen, like what can you do to visually bring down the tension or the triggers in that space? Another tool is building sensory breaks. So these don't have to be long. They can be 30 seconds or 60 seconds. It's enough to reset. But things like deep pressure. So I don't know if you have seen heavy blankets, or there's so many different there's sweatshirts, there's stuffed animals that I have for my kids or for myself. Stretching can be an amazing sensory break. Stepping out of what can be a noisy room into a quieter room, or asking your partner to step in so that you can leave the space, go to a quiet space, do whatever you need to do to give yourself a true break. I just want to add that predictable routines can be really helpful. I know it's not always possible with kids because they're so unpredictable. But transitions have a major impact and can be a huge trigger for a neurodivergent parent. using simple routines or visual cues, or giving yourself and your kids like a heads up. So in the same way that we're told, I'm using screen time, even though I know it's very political screen time, but saying like 5 minutes left, if you can use that tool on yourself and say, I have 5 more minutes to do what I'm doing, and I need to start wrapping this up, that can really help with overwhelm. And then finally, just protecting your capacity through low demand moments. So quiet play or water play, or using sensory bins or activities where the kids are engaged and not climbing on you. And that it just creates pockets of calm, pockets of quiet, so that your system can decompress. If you know, for instance, that on Saturday at 12 p.m., you are going to a birthday party. Okay, I hate birthday parties, but you're going to a birthday party and it's going to be loud and there's going to be kids everywhere. How can you protect your system? Give yourself more capacity before the birthday party so that your battery for that birthday party is filled up. So that's what I mean by protecting your capacity. Now, again, the goal isn't to eliminate sensory input. That's impossible, especially in parenting. It's just about giving your nervous system enough support that you're not constantly operating at that edge of overwhelm.
I really like the battery imagery. I know we hear that a lot with introversion and extroversion, but I think it's really applicable here, and just that monitoring of where's my battery at? What do I need right now? It's a really good check-in.
Yeah.
So co-regulation, this was touched on a little bit earlier, but co-regulation is really when your nervous system is the anchor for your child. The challenge, if you're neurodivergent folks, is that it's harder to be your child's anchor when your own sensory system or your own nervous system is flooded and you're struggling to stay regulated yourself. And sometimes, because none of us are perfect, this can lead to what in psychology we might call a rupture. Sounds worse than it is, but essentially it's a moment where you may disconnect or respond in a way that isn't necessarily aligned with the parent that you want to be towards your child. This could be yelling at them, shutting down, feeling overwhelmed, needing to escape. The key is really to regulate ourselves first and then repair that interaction with our child. And that repair is when we go back to them, if they're old enough to understand, where we apologize, we take ownership, we explain in an age-appropriate way what happened. And of course, we let them know that we love them no matter what. So again, like, none of us are perfect. Ruptures happen to all of us. And good parenting is about recognizing the ruptures when they happen and then taking that step to repair them. And the tips that Alix has been talking about throughout this presentation, I think, are all very helpful for that, that initial emotionally regulating yourselves when you're having a moment where you're dysregulated. So if you can have that opportunity to take that 30 to 60-second break to just check in, to breathe, to give yourself that space, and then return back to your child. And if they're old enough to have that conversation, repair that rupture, that is good parenting. It's impossible to be perfect and to be completely attuned 24/7.
Absolutely. And I'll just add to that, Emily, when you're going back and repairing, explaining what's going on in your body will help them begin to identify what happens in their body. Mummy's chest was feeling tight. Mummy was overwhelmed. Mummy's brain was feeling on fire, and Mummy needed to take a break and come back. And I think, like, using that language, that physical description of what sensory overload looks like to you will help them become independent and identifying it themselves.
And it's a great model to take that break too, and to show that you're taking care of your needs. So we also touched on this earlier. What's the difference between overwhelm and burnout, and how do we prevent burnout? So if you kind of think of these two experiences as on the same spectrum, but maybe on different sides, overwhelm, it feels like you're drowning in everything. It's this kind of anxious, frantic, urgent energy. And you might tell yourself, if I just work harder, if I just keep going, I'll catch up, things will get better. This feels like being stuck in fight or flight mode, where it's very action sped up. And the fix for burnout is that you need that break, or you need less noise, less sensory input right now. You need something in that moment. Burnout is more of a chronic state. It feels like you're dried up completely, like your well is completely empty. It can feel like being numb, detached, checked out. You tell yourself, I can't do this anymore. It doesn't matter. I have nothing left to give. And it's really about being stuck in that freeze, that shutdown mode. And the fix for this is really that you need deep rest and time to recover. We really need to pump the brakes. We really need to take care of ourselves. And ideally, we want to prevent ourselves from getting to this point. So Alix is going to touch on actionable things that we can do to reduce the likelihood of getting to the point of burnout, maybe when we're still in overwhelm.
Yeah, and I love how you said deep rest, because it's it's very different than just taking a break. It involves like a massive shift in how things are going. So when we talk about burnout in parenting, especially for neurodivergent parents, it's really important to understand that it's not about a failure or doing something wrong. It's about living inside of a nervous system that's already doing so much behind the scenes work, and then you're adding nonstop demands on top of it. And burnout for neurodivergent parents can become, without these like tools and support systems in place, can become almost inevitable. You need to have intentional support. So one of the biggest protective, let's say, factors is protecting that sensory system. So that can be the noise, the touch, the clutter, or the constant interruptions. Those are the things that drain your tank. Using tools like those noise reduction headphones. I mean, I'm using AirPods right now, and I have these in all the time. My kids don't even really realize that they're in, but it does remove some of that noise. Softer lighting. So if some people really like bright lights and that makes them feel on, or you can turn the lights down. So adjusting the lighting to what works for you and having that be the consistency in your home, taking those small sensory breaks throughout the day and reminding yourself that taking those breaks, it's not selfish, it's maintenance. It's recharging that battery that you have going. Another piece is simplifying your routines. So neurodivergent brains will often burn a lot of energy on those transitions, the decisions, that executive functioning, and remembering all these different steps. So if you can have some low demand defaults, for instance, the same meals every week, or one cleanup area, or those visual cues and those visual things, if you can put a visual sign up at your door that says, in order to go to work, I need my briefcase, my laptop, my phone charger, my water, my lunch. It's a visual cue, so you don't have to keep those inside of your brain, and it simplifies your whole routine. We also want to share the load, and I would say this is probably the most important. So a lot of parents feel so much pressure to do everything. But tag teaming with a partner, or outsourcing where possible, or trading tasks with a friend, even if they're really good at one thing and you're really good at something else, that you can trade those tasks and support each other. It can give your brain the breathing room that it really needs. And there's really creative ways of sharing the load. So if you don't have a partner, or your partner doesn't have the capacity, there's ways to outsource. There's ways to connect with a community that will help you and you can help them. And there are ways to do this that do not require financial investment. And then there's real rest, like not just 2-minute resets, but honest pockets of downtime. So yes, the tiny small bits of rest really help rebuild your capacity, but sometimes you need serious downtime. So when you're looking at your week, are you scheduling those deep restful moments? And then finally, you need to stay connected. Burnout just grows in isolation. So reaching out and asking for help and building your support system right away. Those are the things, naming what's getting really hard to the people that you trust and who love you. And as Emily was talking about, repairing with your child, explaining to them what's happening in your body. All of this together, it reduces the shame and it reduces the pressure that pile up when your body is fatigued. So, when you think about preventing burnout, this isn't about being perfect. It's about respecting your brain and its special way of being wired so that you can do a better job of parenting in a way that is steady and safe and aligns with your values in your family.
And I think the holidays are really an opportunity to practice a lot of this. Like when you're talking about actual downtime, like scheduling white space around the holidays, there's so much to keep up with. And a lot of us have so many events going on, and just really making sure we have those pockets and those buffers in between where we're resting, we're just maybe just with our families or some alone time. Like we need to be mindful of making sure that we're making space for just the white.
Yeah. And I think here's the thing. I have a lot of clients that I work with as a doula who will say to me, like, I can't do this for myself. It's too much. Like, I don't need this. And I'll say to them, it's really hard. I'm lumping us all in the same generation, but we are not all in the same generation, but I'm lumping us. And I'm saying, as parents now, we were not taught these skills. We were not taught to be aware of our own brain's needs and the skills to take care of our brain, to identify what's going on in our body and say, like, this requires rest. This is overwhelm. We don't have those skills. And so what Emily said about practicing, it takes practice to get really good at this. It takes practice to say, ooh, I feel tired. I'm going to go and take a rest now so that I can be more present at my child's holiday party this afternoon. It takes practice. You're not going to be perfect at this. And know that we're all learning together. We are all learning.
Yeah, we're definitely all in this together. I love that reminder.
And on that note, you don't need to figure this out on your own. Like Emily and I are both here as support systems, and I've pulled together a little quick start guide with a lot of really practical tools and tactics. It's a free download. It's just for you to walk away from this webinar with a tool in mind, and you can download it and leave it for a time when you have the capacity to look through it, or you feel like you need some reminders, you need some help. So you can, we can put in the chat the link, but you can also just use the QR code that's on your screen right now. And yeah, if you have, we'll move into questions, but
I think we're going to share it in the follow-up email too. We'll share
okay.
it. Yeah.
Oh, it's not working. That's okay, Sam and Gabe. Yes. So just to know that, like, we're having this conversation and we want to hear your questions, but we are both resources to you. And please, follow us and email us and let us know if you need any support.
Alix, do you want to just move to the other side because it has our contact info?
Yeah.
Sir, any questions? Denise, yes, the presentation a recording is going to get sent to you, and we'll also send Alix's tool over as well.
I also put it in the chat.
Perfect. Yeah, if anyone has any questions for us or thoughts or reactions, we would definitely love to hear them. So we have a couple minutes left.
Also, is there any literature for, say, like my husband who is neurotypical, on having a neurodivergent partner? Oh my God, Denise, what a fantastic question. So I do have things that I have built for partners in the kind of prenatal postpartum area, but I love the idea of creating something for partners in the more parenting stage. So Denise, let me ask you this. Can you send me an email and I will build something and I will absolutely share that out with everybody.
Yeah. Or Sam and Gabe said, or when both partners are neurodivergent. Do you have any tools for both partners?
I actually did a similar webinar with a couples therapist, and we talked a lot about that, and that is on my website, the recording of that. So yes, there's also on my website, if you go into shop, I will actually bring it up right now, is a guide for neurodivergent couples. So that's great. And Delilah is saying, can you be neurodivergent without an additional diagnosis? Absolutely. Now, when we talk about neurodivergence, there's a lot of conversation around autism, ASD, or ADHD, OCD, anxiety, because if you have anxiety, you are considered neurodivergent, depression. But you absolutely do not need a diagnosis. And often, adults do not get formally diagnosed with any of the things I just listed. So if you feel like your brain is wired differently, if you feel like you move through the world differently, you are neurodivergent. There is no barrier to entry. It is an identity that you can assume. And you often hear a lot of conversation around diagnosis for children because children need a piece of paper with a diagnosis in order to get accommodations at school. And maybe Emily, you can jump in on this, but for adults, we often see a lot less formal diagnoses because unfortunately there's a cost associated with them and they can be prohibitive.
Yeah, and I see a lot of parents coming in presenting to therapy who tell me, I've always felt like something was a little bit different about how my brain worked, but I was never diagnosed. This wasn't talked about when I was younger. So I think a lot of people are now learning more about neurodivergence and they're seeing themselves in it, and everything is kind of all clicking. But yeah, by no means do you have to have a diagnosis. If you want to get a diagnosis, there are routes to that. You could speak with a psychologist. You could speak with a therapist who works with neurodivergent folks. And if you wanted to pursue that route, they can do some formal testing or some measures and give you a more formal diagnosis. But it's definitely by no means required.
And I'll add that it's really important if you are neurodivergent to find a support provider, whether that's a therapist, a social worker, or doula that understands neurodivergence, that is neuroaffirming. And you can just ask that question like you would ask any other qualifying question.
Yeah. Well, this was so helpful, Alix. Thank you for sharing all of your wisdom. So you can be found at your website,
Yep.
Love Tenderly,
Yep.
and Instagram, and you do virtual services as well,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Predominantly virtual.
What does that look like in terms of if someone's expecting or postpartum? What does that look like virtually?
Absolutely. So if you are expecting, I do pregnancy check-ins. So every time you go see your doctor, your midwife, whoever's supporting you, we'll have a conversation afterwards. I explain all the language and the lingo that they use. I answer all of your questions. And then I do a lot of virtual birth planning, and I even do and attend virtual births. I also do in-person births, but I definitely do virtual births where I'm with you the whole time. I'm just like on your phone. Anytime someone comes in, anytime a decision is having to be made, if your partner needs support, I'm there to instruct them. We practice all this stuff beforehand, so you really feel supportive, but it's just you and whoever you've chosen to be in the room with you. And then postpartum, it's a lot of feeding support and emotional support. And I am certified in mental health first aid, so I'm also scanning and can help you identify any mental health crises that you're struggling with and how to address them and putting systems into place. So there's so much that a doula can help and support you with. I highly recommend having one, especially if you're neurodivergent. And again, just anytime that you're working with, whether it's your doctor or a therapist or doula, ask them, what do you know about neurodivergence? Are you neurofirming? What does your practice put in place to support my sensory system? Those are questions you have the right to answers to.
Well, I love it. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
And our website's here as well. So we're a mental health practice that specializes in working with expecting and new parents. And we're neurodivergent affirming. And we provide care in 42 states and take insurance in New York, California, South Carolina, and Florida.
Yay.
So thank you all for your time. Thank you, Alix. And we will definitely get you all the recording and the resources that we shared here today.
Thank you.
Bye.